over me. She comes in with her hypnotic dance. She holds me here with only a glance. She's over me. She's over me.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, welcome to the Saturday edition of the Paranormal Portal. Hope you guys are doing great. We are just cooking away the night here, just getting started. We're still trying to connect with our guest tonight, Mr. Al Tyas.
I'm here, man.
What's that?
I'm here, man.
Oh my God, you are here. Oh,
Yeah.
well, when did you join the dance?
Puff of smoke came out and I walked out of it and just sat down.
Ooh, that's rather fitting, I would say, for tonight's topic. All right.
Yeah,
Hold
I
on.
just saw the little join button. I was like, oh, I guess it's time. And I got right on. So
Very good, very good. Well, let me introduce you both, and also joining us tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is our own Mr. Don Longbeard. He's along for the journey. How you doing, brother?
Doing good, doing good. It's been a long day. Thank God it's over.
Al, you look so festive. And
you
of
gotta
course,
be in the mood for it.
yeah, that's really cool, though. I actually think that's pretty awesome. The plague mask, the plague doctors, awesome, very cool.
Anyways.
And joining us is paranormal author and researcher, well, a retired researcher, investigator anyway, but he's a continuous researcher. He's a retired investigator. So welcome, brother. Great to have you back and joining us.
Thank you, sir. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
It's good to be back. It's good to have some social interaction during quarantine too.
You know,
So,
it's a tough
it's
run
all
right
good.
now. That's a tough run for a lot of people right now with this whole quarantine and all of this. So yeah, it's really great to have you here, and thank you, because the topic tonight is going to be one that I think it really needs explaining. It really needs to be addressed, because people use the term all the time. You hear people throwing around the term Jinn. Jinn, well, it's a Jinn. It's a Jinn. And I don't know how much people really understand what a Jinn is. So I'm really excited that on tonight's show you're going to kind of walk us through that and
I hope
demystify it,
Yeah.
demystify it a little bit. But yeah, let me get you guys leveled out a little bit here. Okay. So I guess first starting off, ladies and gentlemen, Al is an accomplished researcher and author, and has a couple of books out there. One of which is, well, just let us know the names of your books, Al, because I want people to have that right on the table, right in front of them.
Yeah. One of them is Last Call on the Potomac,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really about the general. When I was actually actively investigating, I wrote Last Call on the Potomac in 2006,
Mm-hmm.
and I just really wrote about my experiences going through a lot of, haunted environments in the DC metro area, pretty much, and I was able to get into some pretty well-known places, and I was able to write about the findings. So it really was just a book about the kind of like the memoirs and ideas about what I found and all that stuff and everything. And then that was right when I was about to leave too.
Okay.
And then when I started, after I left and walked away from all of the active investigating and still did the research, I started to really start noticing that my concepts and theories that I'm coming up with are not really mainstream. So I started saying to myself, I want to write a book about what I think that I've learned from my research in addition to my investigating. And kind of like, even as a member of almost like my mistakes too, of not knowing and going in the way I did and all that stuff, and what I've
Uh-huh.
learned over the years. And I wrote Project Rabbit Hole, and that really is a way to kind of pull everything together, like not just ghosts and hauntings, but also other things that are coming up, like Jinn and nature spirits, and even gray aliens, UFOs, and a lot of the various things that are involved in this. And I have a theory that they're all kind of linked,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I go over is the links that have come up with the investigations. So so that's basically it. Um, so that's really where I went with that, and I did a lot of research into that, and I was kind of blown away by the results that I found with it. And one of them is how I started to realize that most people think that in our Western society, most people just think that if it's a haunting or if it's even paranormal, it's automatically a ghost.
Mm.
When I started looking at these things more in depth, and I started saying to myself, like, that doesn't classify as what a ghost would classify as, in a sense. Ghosts generally don't do this or they don't do that. So, what exactly is it? So, I started to really look at all the angles of various things, and not only have I researched, but I've spoken to people about in their case files and people who have had experiences with their own hauntings. And I came up with the whole idea that what you're experiencing is not necessarily what you think it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to kind of take a second look at it and really kind of figure it out. So that's why I wrote Project Rabbit Hole. I wrote about why we believe what we believe, because right now we only believe what we believe because we're in a particular place at a particular time in history. 500 years ago, people thought completely differently.
Mm-hmm.
500 years from now, people will think very differently.
Sure.
So it kind of evolves in a lot of ways like that. Even like the concept of ghosts, even just 100 years ago, was very different than what it is now. The way to investigate them was very different. The way to identify things was different. And 100 years from then, it was the same thing. It was different from then. So it's kind of like just what we're looking at now, and it's going to change again. And what I'm seeing now is more of a angle that's starting to very slowly move towards Jinn, and there's a lot of hesitation with that at the same time because people are kind of afraid of the Jinn because they don't quite understand the Jinn. But on the other hand, they have a justifiable reasons for being afraid of Jinn, as far as I'm concerned with
Yeah.
it, because they are pretty dangerous. If you encounter one, you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. And now my research has gone a lot more involved into the Jinn and the Jinn phenomenon with it and seeing where they fit. So I've started to look at all the different types of entities that people can encounter and how you can like classify a Jinn opposed to it being particularly a ghost or a nature spirit or something else like that, and kind of see like the difference with it like that. And that's what I'm kind of looking at now, and what I'm starting to realize more and more is that the Jinn are related to some of these other things, but they're also in a class on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And if you encounter a Jinn, you're going to have a lot of problems. And if you encounter a Jinn, you're not going to be able to get rid of it very easily.
Right.
So
Now,
that's kind of what I'm looking at with it.
is so why don't we start with what is a jinn? Because I think people have a very rudimentary or almost no idea of what it means to be a jinn or to be experiencing a jinn. So what is a jinn?
Sure. Uh, a Jinn is basically, if you have to look at it like in two different ways. One is the almost like the religious background of them, which
Mm-hmm.
comes with Islam. And with Islam, they basically say that angels were created from light, man was created from clay, and jinn were created from smokeless fire, as they call it. And nowadays people are thinking like smokeless fire is probably related to plasma or something similar to that, but they were created from a smokeless fire. And in Islamic religion, the jinn are not demons because they have a free will. And that's one of the biggest things that's a difference with jinn is that they have more of a free will. They can do bad to us. They can choose to do good to us. They can choose to just ignore us. It doesn't really matter with them. They're not bounded by anything to do anything in particular. They do whatever they want, what they kind of feel like with in regards to us. So it makes us a lot less egocentric in a way like that because some jinn could care less about us at all unless you do something to bother them or something like that. Uh, and I think that's the first thing about it is that they are kind of like, at least in religion, they're creating a class of all their own with it. So you have that. Two is that they have a very similar social structure to what we have, meaning like they're born, they get married, they have a sense of law and order within their own societies, they raise families, they're male and female, and they die. They just live a lot longer than we do, like centuries longer than we do. But according to tradition, they eventually they would die.
Huh.
So they have their own ways about them like that, and they also are much more smarter than we are, and they have abilities to kind of cross dimensions over to ours and back.
Hmm.
At least some of them do. And so some of them have a curiosity about us.
Hmm.
And they also have a resentment toward us because they don't have the physical bodies that we have. And as a result of that, they don't have the physical pleasures that we have. So a lot of the things that we have, like eating a big bowl of ice cream, for example, or, you know, use your imagination,
Sure.
what they wouldn't really have. So they are in my experience, they're the ones that are more likely to possess a person rather than a demon,
Hmm.
just so they can experience what it's like to be in a person's body like that. And then when they possess, of course, they would need some sort of an exorcism or something like that with it. And they also have a tendency to haunt. They
Hmm.
can do a lot of the things that a ghost can do, but they're just a lot more powerful in regards to that. So I would say a jinn is a separate class of beings that's different from the other ones like that because in one way they're very similar to us, but yet they also have the classifications as other paranormal entities would be with it, with how they act, moving things around, for example, scaring people, the way they can interact with us in a lot of ways. I watched some videos solely on the Middle East and their interactions with Jinn, and they're downright terrifying, to be honest. A
Sure.
lot of stuff doesn't scare me, but I see some of the things that people experience over there, and if they are faking this stuff, they're doing a pretty good job with it. But some of their stuff that they have over there is pretty terrifying with it. So the ones that do encounter and interact with us, they have a trickster element to them,
Oh.
meaning like, they have that constant trickster element to them. Like they'll do something to mess with somebody just to the point where they have the belief that there's something really weird going on. But then when somebody comes in to investigate it or figure out what's going on, whatever, nothing ever happens. And then when you least expect it, at like maybe 3:30 in the morning, 3 weeks later, all hell will break loose in the house,
Wow.
like that. And that's kind of a typical way of doing it like that. So I think that really a jinn is, like I said, it's a type of entity that's kind of had on its own because of its free will and its social standings and the way that it actually interacts with us is a little bit different. And I think that they're probably the most powerful out of everything that we research and study and things like that as well.
So you'd say that they're more powerful than, say, a demon, like a true demonic entity.
Well, in in Islam, if a jinn decides to retreat and go the dark side, then they're called ifrits. And
Ifrits.
an ifrit is basically like a demon.
Okay.
And then they can do whatever a demon does. The difference is that a demon is basically intrinsically antagonistic towards people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's in their instinct to be antagonistic towards people. That's how they are. They're like exist to tempt us. They exist for our destruction. They exist for the fall, our fall.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what we have been taught. Like that, a jinn can choose to be helpful, ignore us, or to be that way as well, and to be like downright evil and just like attack us and mess with us and do whatever they want to do with it. But for them, it's like a personal choice for them to do that and be that way. So if you think about an angel, they don't have free will. They follow God's plan and God's orders, and that's it.
Right.
A demon does whatever it does in order to assist in our destruction.
Mm-hmm.
A jinn chooses.
That's really interesting. And now the term genie is that just a bastardization of a jinn, or is that or would that describe a bound jinn that would be bound to the
Well,
will of somebody?
a genie would, if it's like a DGINNI,
Mm-hmm.
which is how I look at it, that simply means it's a female.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and a jinn with a DJINN is a male.
Oh,
So, and like with most languages, if it's a jinn, that can connotate male or female, but a genie specifically connotates a female jinn,
hmm. So,
like that.
and I don't expect you to know this, but I'm curious if this is a force or an energy that historically people that are practicing occult, like deep occult in terms of controlling spirits, if this would be a very lucrative target for some magician to try to bind to do their bidding. Is that I don't know. Are you at all aware of any of that?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I am actually. People are learning more and more because of the internet,
Mm-hmm.
especially. And now that knowledge through the internet is becoming universal, people are accessing information like they never could before.
Sure.
And as a result of that, there is a renaissance pretty much within occultism, meaning that now there are so many grimoires and various books and things that come up that have not come up before.
Mm-hmm.
And people can use these things to summon anything that they want to try to do their bidding. Now, if it's a good occultist that know what they're doing, now I don't want to say good like
No.
morally, but experienced occultists that know what they're doing, he or she would be able to summon something up depending on what they're looking for.
Sure.
And there are some that will summon up a demon, and they'll actually will summon up a demon to kind of use to do their bidding, and a lot of them will summon up and work with Jinn.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's very hard to do this because a lot of times when they summon these things up, these things do not want to work with us.
Yeah.
But there's methods to bind these things to work with us. If you ever read the Book of Solomon, I think it's in the Apocrypha. It's not in the traditional Bible, but it's about how Solomon built his temple.
Yeah.
He had a special ring, and he used, I think it was Michael the Archangel, who kind of served as the foreman. And one by one, he summoned up all these. A lot of people think that they're actually Jinn, and they actually built the temple with it. And they hated Solomon. They hated the whole concept of building a religious temple, but they were bound to do so with it because they were literally like forced labor.
Right.
And I've seen magicians do that. They actually use beings like Jinn as forced labor. And the Jinn may even say, well, I can't do anything to you, but eventually you're going to have a descendant that's not going to be protected, and they're going to get everything because I'm going to be living a lot longer than you are, buddy. And when your grandson's born, don't expect him to have a good life.
Yeah.
And they will do that.
Oh, yeah.
And Jinn are masters at generational curses too, like that, because they don't have they really don't have empathy like we understand empathy. So they won't hesitate if you anger one of them. They won't hesitate to not only go after you, but go after your family as well. And they don't care who it is either. They'll attack, which is why I would say, like on a paranormal investigation, if a Jinn is encountered, and there's always like the alpha male on the paranormal investigation is kind of bigger than everybody else, who wants to be the one to say I'm not scared of anything, and he goes home. Something follows him home, which is the first inclination that it's not a ghost. Something follows him home, and secondly, the next thing you know, his youngest child is having constant nightmares, sees something in the corner of the room constantly, hasn't slept in days, distresses the entire family. And this is what a Jinn would do. It's like, no, I'm not going to deal with you, fat boy. I could care less with you. I'm going to go after your kid. And they'll do that. And they would know that that's the way that they would affect that investigator the most out of
Sure.
everything, because the investigator, if gets like shoved around or whatever it would be, he may see it as a thrill and tell all of his friends, oh yeah, I got shoved around, oh my god, it's so cool, and some of them are like that. They're like sadists.
Yeah.
And then you have but if they go after somebody who's innocent in the family, that's a whole different story. And that's a pretty common thing to happen with
Yeah.
it. If something comes in, I look at it this way. If somebody is investigating an abandoned haunted place that's been abandoned for, usually it's more than 7 years, like let's say it's a mental institution, because a lot of people love going to those places.
Yeah.
They're investigating, somebody goes in there and goofs off and tries to rile something up, and they do stupid things and whatever like that, like we've seen it all. They go home, something follows them home and starts attacking the heck out of them. They'd probably disturb the Jinn.
Oh, okay.
Because Jinn don't just exist in the Middle East, they're everywhere, but they like to go into abandoned places. I don't know why exactly, but they like to go into abandoned places that are associated with violence and death, and a lot of them kind of like squat in places like that, which is one of the reasons why in the Middle East they're very, very hesitant to reuse a building that's abandoned for a long time, because they know that they could be inhabited by Jinn. So they'll tend to avoid it. Well, meanwhile, we're like, yeah, let's go, like find some ghosts or whatever like that, and they probably woke up a dormant Jinn. And if you there are two types of Jinn that you really don't want to wake up, and one is a dormant Jinn, and the other one is a female Jinn that's a mother. And if you disturb either of those, they're going to retaliate. And that's hard for a Westerner to understand.
Well, sure. And how would you know? I mean, if you're investigating, you don't know what you're walking into. So I mean,
Well, that's the biggest problem, and that's one of the biggest things that I write about in Project Rabbit Hole, is that we assume we know what's in there when we go in. And I
sure.
was thinking about this earlier today, and I was thinking, like, if you have a litter of puppies and you want one of those puppies, and somebody tells you, like, oh, these four puppies out of these five puppies, one of them has rabies. Are you going to be a little more hesitant to pursue one of these puppies if you know there's a 20% chance that it has rabies? Probably so. If you have no idea that you could get the one. I shouldn't say rabies. Let's just say it's Cujo. you know, and this one dog can grow up and cheer up your family or whatever like that. So if you have that fifth dog, the chances are like that you'd be a lot more hesitant in um, taking any of that litter. You would be a lot more hesitant with that. So if you have a haunted building and you say like, okay, that building there, you have 4 buildings here that are haunted. This one is known for some really horrible things that happen because whatever's in there is probably not human. People are probably going to go running to
Yeah.
it. You know, they don't have the sense of danger that you would have in other types of situations
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, we've got certainly a lot of ground to cover tonight because I think
Yeah,
this is an incredibly complex kind of subject, and
yeah,
I guess I had never heard of them procreating and having families of a sort. I didn't ever
yes,
hear that they could be have a mortality. That's a new one to me as well.
yeah,
I just always assumed that they were a spiritual being and as such weren't affected because they were energetic rather than, physical and going through entropy and atrophy and all of that our bodies do. But we are going to be going to our first break already. That's how
wow,
fast it flies here in the portal, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, we are joined tonight by Al Tyas, paranormal author, and we are discussing and exploring the Jinn, which I think is a long overdue subject to be discussed because it comes up a lot, and I don't think there's a lot of understanding of what that actually means. So we're sure thrilled that Al joined us tonight, and hopefully we'll get into some more amazing stuff as the night goes on. But please don't go away, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Paranormal Portal. Half hour number 2 is upon us, and we're going through the night, exploring all of the fantastic information regarding the Jinn. It's a term that gets used an awful lot, and again, I think we've largely misunderstood what that means. So tonight we are joined not only by our very own Mr. Don Longbeard, but Mr. Al Tyas as well. Don, how you doing, man?
Doing good, I think. I'm good over here. I'm kind of shocked at what Al is talking about. Specifically, like you said, the whole idea that they have families and that they actually go through a dying process and things like that. Those are things I've never heard. So it's definitely an interesting start to the night.
Yeah, it sure is. And I think that's really cool. I mean, I don't pretend to know either way. It's just a new revelation to me, but I think it's incredibly interesting. I have to ask, how did you come across information like that they have a lifespan and stuff, Al?
Well, that's where it all comes through research with it, really. I started looking at different types of research. One of the greatest experts on Jinn that I have met was Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I had the opportunity to meet her in Mystic, Connecticut several years ago. She's since passed away.
Oh.
And she wrote a couple of really good books on Jinn, and she did a lot of research into the subject. And it was a little bit difficult because a lot of the stuff that we have is still in Arabic.
Mm.
And there's still kind of like a lot of cultural boundaries and things like that. But I went into the library and I just really kind of delved into this kind of stuff for starters,
Mm-hmm.
just to really find these things out. And the other thing that I did was I started. I had the fortune to meet up with some Muslim people who've had things happen in their homes.
Oh.
Where I live in the DC metro area, we have a big Muslim population. We have probably one of the biggest ones in the United States.
Okay.
And Muslims have hauntings too.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But when they have their hauntings are very different than ours because their perspective is different than ours.
Mm.
And when you talk to a Muslim, the first thing they're going to say is, it's a jinn. And
Right.
they'll say, like, in Islam, there are no ghosts in Islam. When you
Right.
die, you go to wherever you're going to go. You don't hang out around here.
Mm-hmm.
So they have the tendency to think that anything that's haunting an environment is a jinn.
Right.
And I learned that when I was researching an inn for my book, and it's called the Bailiwick. And I met a young Muslim woman there who was who worked in the hotel, and I interviewed her, and she said, I don't know why Americans are so obsessed in this stuff. It's all jinn, and they're not friendly, and they're not something you really want to interact with. And I said to her, like, well, this was like back in like 2004, I think, and I said to her, well, what do you mean? And she said just what I said, when people die, they don't linger around here. That's a jinn doing that. And that was it, like that. So so in their culture, whatever they believe is a jinn, and there aren't ghosts at all. So I found it to be interesting because if any of us grew up in the Middle East, we'd have a completely different perspective on this stuff.
Sure.
So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I just started doing some more research into Jinn. I actually had a case I worked on that involved a woman that was being attacked by a Jinn.
Oh.
And that was the one that really opened up my eyes because it really scared me. And I'm the type of person who, and I'm not saying this to brag at all, but I've gone on so many investigations, I don't get scared easily.
Right.
That one scared me because I didn't know what I was getting into with it. And at first I was not even going to take the case because in my I would say in my own ignorance at the time, I was thinking like, oh God, there's no way I can handle this thing. I can't handle Muslims. I don't know anything about this, and those kinds of things. And a friend of mine persuaded me to take the case because he actually called her and said she's got something really bad going on. She needs help, and nobody's helping her.
Mm.
And I took the case, and so I took two guys with me, and we went to her house, and she was there, and her fiance was there, and they were like, it was really kind of interesting because we walked in, and they were cooking us dinner. There was not even a question about it. It's like, you're
Aw.
here, we're feeding you, and that's it. And so we sat around and we ate dinner with them and everything, and then when we were done, she just started saying, I'm being attacked by a Jinn. And I'm not the only one in my family who's been attacked by this. It's that my brother has been attacked, my parents have been attacked,
Mhm.
and it's gone all the way up the family line, and I believe that I'm next. And and I thought to myself a lot of things like why me? Why aren't you going to like an imam or
Right.
somebody like that? And I never got the answer to that question. And
Mm.
I wasn't gonna sit there and ask her that. You know, she had her reasons for contacting my group. So I'm like, okay, I'll abide by it. And I did everything that I knew to do
Mhm.
to get something out of a building.
Okay.
And one thing that I did was I created this. It's kind of like a talisman. It actually is a talisman, and it's like an 8 by 8 square piece of wood, and it has burned into it the sigils or like the real symbols of the four archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael.
Mhm.
And when she went in and we instructed her on how to do like a ritual bath and that to kind of like cleanse herself and everything. So we instructed her to do that, and while she was in the bathroom doing that, we were with her fiance, and I don't know if he knew I did this or not, but I don't think he did. But I slipped that talisman under the bed,
Ah.
and so and I stayed in touch with her, and it was interesting because when we were there, I was thinking to myself like, this thing is not in here right now, but it's around. I can tell there's something around like this, and I don't know how I know that, but I know there's something around here, and it's watching come up from a distance.
Mhm.
And I think she was the one that said, yeah, I didn't say that to her. I was just thinking that, and she was the one that said like, it's kind of on the patio right now, but
Oh.
it's watching.
Mm.
And I said, well, they can stay out there. So, anyways, so after we did what we did, we did contact her, and she said it got back into the house, but it will not touch her in bed.
Oh.
And that was the best thing about it because she was getting basically raped by this thing.
Oh, jeez.
And she said it would only get so close and then it would retreat. And I think it's because I slipped that talisman under the bed. I like to
Mhm.
think that that's what's doing it like that. And it makes me realize too that these things will um, retreat under the power of the archangels,
Mhm.
so to speak, with it. And so I was glad to say that. And then we lost touch with her, so I don't know ultimately what happened
Right.
with it. But it's one of those cases that I'll never forget because it was so different from the ones that I was, accustomed to
Right.
with these things. And it made me realize too, like this is a classic example of how you can tell the difference between a jinn and a ghost because a ghost would probably retreat somewhere, but it wouldn't be able to like leave the premises and just go would be one thing
Mm.
with it. And I don't think a ghost would be that powerful to do something like that. And I'm pretty sure that a talisman or something like that wouldn't keep a ghost from hovering around somebody or whatever they do. So it's kind of a whole different kind of an element, so to speak, with it. So so she was at least okay the last time I heard, but I don't know ultimately what happened with it.
Right.
But that case was the one that got me thinking about it. And so I started talking with some paranormal investigators I know in Europe
Mm-hmm.
and started asking them about it too. And like, well, what do you think about this? And as I was doing it, I just started to just do more and more research into the Jinn, and I started to see what happens and what they do and those kinds of things. And that's pretty much how it started. It was kind of a baptism by fire experience.
Now, is it
And
if
yes.
you don't mind, is it your experience then that the Jinn normally they won't respond as well or at all to some traditional things like, let's say, for instance, saging or I don't know, maybe they do to holy water, but as a blessed object, that's kind of universal. But like sage or symbols that might otherwise repel ghosts or keep them away. Do those same things like salt and sage and I don't know, I'm just frankincense, those kind of things. Are they as effective on the Jinn, or is it less effective, or is it pretty just universal?
I think some of that stuff is effective. Iron is effective.
Iron,
I always tell people to use iron,
because why?
because for some reason, pure iron is like a defense against them. I don't know why it is,
Hmm,
but they
that's
just
it.
kind of like retreat with iron. Now, I'm not talking about cast iron, like fireplace tools, like in the show Supernatural. I'm talking about actual pure iron in itself with it. Is one thing with it, and that's one of the things I think about is how they all kind of fall under the same family in a sense like that, because a lot of the stuff that you would use to keep other things away will work on Jinn.
Hmm,
But the problem with it though is they may only work temporarily for
right,
so long, and when
sure.
the Jinn finds kind of like a chink in an armor, they're going to go full
Sure.
venge on that,
Now,
and so
it's
that would be a
interesting.
problem with.
It's interesting too that iron is legendarily, and some people swear by it, but it's also an
Mhm.
effective barrier against the Fae. And the Fae are apparently
Exactly.
repelled by iron. So there must be a similarity there, but I've not heard that. Even though on
Well,
Supernatural, the show, it makes it look like you can swing, as you were saying,
to
like a
just
poker
grab the
around.
fireplace poker. Yeah.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
that allegedly isn't effective on ghosts as we understand them, but it is against the Fae, and now you're saying it is against the Jinn as well. So I find that interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Um, that will actually work on them, and a lot of times, just having a strong immune system keeps them away too.
Really?
Like that, they won't be able to kind of oppress around somebody if they have a stronger immune system. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of times, when there's a Jinn in the family, the sickest person in the family will be the one that's the most affected,
Mm,
or the one with the weakest immune system. A lot of times it'll be a baby, or it'll be like a child, or it'll be an elderly person,
mm,
something, somebody, kind of like that with it. And that's also one of the reasons why we always told women, that are, of childbearing age, and actually all women, to make sure that you get your iron checked, because having an iron deficiency can cause you to be more sensitive to these kinds of things.
yeah.
And we've actually did a lot of research on that and found out that, if you have low iron, you might be more susceptible to an attack rather than to
Ah,
have a higher iron. And women tend to lose iron more than men do through the menstrual cycle. So that's one thing that we try to keep up. That's important with that. But yeah, they you start to kind of learn about these things, and when you start learning about them, you start to kind of like have to dump out your cup and refill it in a sense like that too.
Sure.
And that can be a little bit difficult. But you mentioned nature spirits and elementals in that, and I was actually thinking about that earlier. Like, how would you know it's a Jinn
Mm-hmm.
and not a nature spirit?
Right.
Uh, the one thing would be with the activity with it, and I have an example of this.
Okay.
This is a historical home, and I got a phone call from somebody who volunteered um, at this particular museum that was like one of those old houses turned into a museum for people to go into and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And their director was approached by a team of paranormal investigators, and they wanted to do an investigation. And the director was reluctant about it, but the director was also curious
Mm-hmm.
about it. So um, the staff let the paranormal investigators in and do an investigation. Now, the house has never had any evidence of a haunting at all. Like
Okay.
nothing. Like they even said that. They said, nobody ever died in it. There's been nothing. There's no evidence of it. There's been no activity. There's been no nothing. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's haunted, basically. But the investigators went in, and when they did, water started leaking everywhere,
Oh.
like leaking from corner to the ceiling, leaking on the floor, leaking everywhere. It was like the whole house started leaking. And what freaked the staff out was that the places where the water was leaking from, there weren't any pipes. So they got really freaked out by this. So the staff of the house ended the whole thing completely, like asked the investigators to leave, got them out, and then they had to do, of course, damage control. Like if you work in a museum or a place like that, you got to
Sure.
do that. And so they started moving things to kind of dry them out and all that stuff and everything, and did the best they could, and left there until the next day. And when they came back the next day, there was not a single sign that there was any water in the house at all.
Oh, wow.
Everything was dry. Everything was fine. There was absolutely nothing like that. It was almost like it was a mass illusion of flooding or something like that. And that director said, I will never, ever get involved in this stuff again. you know,
Yeah.
and the first thing, and now what they thought was that, oh, well, and they had like these crazy theories behind this stuff and everything. But what I said was, one of them brought in a water elemental,
Mm.
and that water elemental came in there, and for one reason or another, it wreaked havoc on the house. And that was it. And the reason why I said it is because it never happened before, never happened again, and it only happened when went into that building. So this thing was. So what I'm thinking is what happened. This is no offense to anybody who has an alternate religion, believe me. But a lot of times that people are involved in this kind of stuff, they're into paganism or witchcraft or the occult or one of those things, and that's fine. But what they do is they do these rituals to pull in the elemental energies in, like they do a calling upon the watchtowers, as they call it. And then they don't banish properly. And if you don't banish properly, you can get one of those guys stuck on you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get one of the guys stuck on you, and if the environment's right, they're going to wreak havoc like they did in that house, like that.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what happened. So that's really the difference is it was connected to its element, and it was kind of like they're kind of like feral animals, and when they're trapped, they kind of do what they do to get out of their environment or whatever like that, and that was it. So really, that was the water elemental. A Jinn wouldn't have done that. A Jinn would have acted very, very differently if a Jinn was involved at all in a situation like that. And a situation like that, a Jinn probably wouldn't be involved in it. So
Yeah.
so you can kind of see like a difference with that, with it. And if it was like an earth elemental, you'd have things that are kind of earth related happening too, just like if it was an air elemental, same thing. So yeah, so that would be the difference with that. So really, it's kind of like in a way, it's like an onion, and you peel off this, you peel off this, you peel off this, and the gin is left in a sense. While we always think that the ghost is the default, my mentality is starting to shift a little bit, and I'm thinking like, well, maybe the Jinn is a default, and everything else could be something else. But there's a lot of things you have to look at to make the determination with it.
Yeah.
That makes any sense.
Well, I think it's a loaded
Yeah.
deck in all of this because there's so many layers and pieces and parts, and there's bleed through. So again, there's going to be overlaps, and I don't
Yeah.
expect anyone to be able to come on here and just give us clear boundaries. But I'm just curious your take on these things
Yeah.
because again,
Well,
I don't think we know.
I look at it like a diagnosis. Like a lot of times when if you're sick, you go to the doctor. The doctor may say, "Well, it might be this." Well, wait, no, it's not that. We've ruled that out. Well, it might be this, but we'll rule that out.
Hmm.
Oh, so it might be this. Well, I'm pretty confident now it's this based on what we know. And that's how a haunting should be approached.
Yeah. Yeah.
That way with
Well,
it, because then you have a better understanding of what it actually is.
right, and I agree that a lot of investigators go in with these, and it's kind of my pet peeve always whenever and this is just taking the Hollywoodized shows. They get a history on a place and they go in and they spend the whole time going, is Mister blah 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 here, Mister blah blah blah, what are you doing here? Why are you still here? And the whole investigation is geared at this one figure. Well, how the hell do they know who's there? Just because somebody at one time lived in a house and maybe there was some kind of history doesn't mean that whatever's going on in that house is tied to that at all,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they tend to make that assumption because they go after what's the most obvious with it. Oh, somebody died in the house, therefore it's them.
Yeah.
You know, and yet it's kind of funny because if you look at something else, like let's just say, for example, the Amityville house. It seems like not one person interested in investigating the Amityville house is interested in whether or not it's haunted by the DeFeo family.
Yeah.
It's all about whatever went after the Lutzes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's kind of like the opposite in a sense like that. It's kind of like whatever is the most sensationalized, and they kind of jump on it and they go with it when they don't look at the big picture with a lot of these things with it. That's just my opinion about it like
Mm-hmm.
that. So,
Yeah.
but it can be difficult.
Yeah.
It can be difficult to figure it all out and that kind of stuff. As a side note, if you want privacy and want to be left alone, don't buy the Amityville house. And I see that all the time. These people go, "We just want our privacy. We want to be left alone." It's like, you bought the Amityville house, you idiot.
Right. What were you? Yeah.
You
What
know?
were you going for? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, what did you expect? You expect the people to leave you alone, numbs alone? I
Mm-hmm.
don't think so. So, anyways, but that's kind of what I think about that. So I hope I'm kind of being a little more clear about what's going on with the Jinn with it,
Yes.
and kind of trying to like remove all the kind of mystery with it, and
Right.
kind of like see what we're left with of what we really actually have
Right. Now
with it.
we've got about 2 minutes before the break, but we have a question in the chat from TFR, and that chat is Bam in the chat is asking, ask where do Jinn come from, please? And we made a little reference about it, the smokeless fire, but maybe we'll wait until we actually come back to let you get into at what point, because I know in the order of alleged creation, they do have a very significant position in that, according to the Quran and such. So, if you could get into that on the other side, at least to make some understanding as to their origin. And it's funny you said smokeless fire, but I always thought it was the blue flame. So, is that the same thing or?
Not quite.
Okay.
I just always see it as like I've always thought it as like plasma, like a red fire,
Yeah.
like a red flame. Well, it's hard to say with
Right.
it. That's kind of like an open to interpretation thing as well. But I do see the blue flame symbolizing the Jinn a lot
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So
Yep. And I think
yep.
that what was it? What was that movie? Clash of the Titans, the remake. that guy. That
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously portraying a Jinn, being part of the whole adventure, and I thought that was really interesting. But we are down to just under 30 seconds here, ladies and gentlemen, until we go to our hour break, and we will get right back to it with Al Tyas here on the Paranormal Portal, exploring the Jinn. But after the show, be sure to stick around and catch Paisley Wild. She will be coming up next with the Spaces Between, and our very own Don is producer and kind of co-host on the show there too. So he's getting around. We gotta share Don a little bit, but that's okay. So the Spaces Between will be coming up next, and Don, if you could at some point before the end of the show, let us know what she's going to be covering so we can pass that on.
I'll see if I can get a word in edgewise.
All right, we'll be right back, guys. Don't go away.
Everybody likes to play their games. Everybody loves to place their bets. They don't understand the price I paid. They don't care to comprehend. Trace their lines upon my body, dripping scars across my heart. Raging anger pours inside me as their lies keep falling apart. I am finished with my silence. I am not a stupid boy. No more breaking me with kindness. Just you dance upon my joy. Leading me with empty promise to just another fucking mess. Taking off the slice of my sanity, just make sure that you're well fed. I'm not wrong yet. I'm not wrong yet.
they're attracted to the one thing about her that is different from themselves. Her life force, it is very strong. It gives off its own illumination. It is a light that implies life and memory of love and home and earthly pleasures. Something they desperately desire, but can't have anymore. Right now, she's the closest thing to that.
Poltergeist are usually associated with an individual. Hauntings seem to be connected with an area. A house, usually.
Poltergeist disturbances have fairly short duration, perhaps a couple of months. Hauntings can go on for years.
Ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 is upon us as we are going through the evening here with our special guest tonight, Mr. Al Tyas, who is a paranormal author and a hell of a researcher as well. So he is here to illuminate the path for us in understanding the idiosyncrasies and intricacies of the Jinn, or Jinny, if they're a female, which I learned tonight as well. So this is a bucket full of learning here tonight. So welcome back again, everybody. And of course, Al, this is it's pretty deep, man. This is pretty deep.
It is.
Yeah.
It really is. And I really think that if you're investigating this kind of stuff, the supernatural in general, it should be deep.
Yeah.
Because you're getting involved in some things that we really truly don't understand. And it has to be kind of like in a deeper level with it if you really get it. Because for years and years and years, this was only left up to a certain group of people that had like their own separate, almost like a culture to speak, and they swapped the information among themselves because there was so much information that was involved in it. And nowadays, it's kind of like, oh, grab your EMF meter and go. It's become I think it's become almost too easy to do that anybody can just jump into this and just start doing it with virtually no training or background with it. And that's where I can sound a bit snobby about it, but I also feel like it's for your own personal safety as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, playing with forces you don't understand is always a dangerous thing, And of course, there's a lot of horror stories in the paranormal world of people that got it wrong and got it really wrong, and got hurt or got someone that they know and love hurt in the process. Because as you mentioned before, when you're going out there, you are not only involving yourself into something, but you're potentially involving your entire family in something. By that pursuit. And so I think it should be done with a lot of caution and a lot of preparation and a lot of protection.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't quite understand that, and that's kind of where our ego kind of gets into it quite a bit too, because people want to be the one to get the brass ring. That's the ultimate, proof, so to speak, of something there, which I don't think is ever going to happen. But you have different parts of it there. But if you don't even know what you're up against, it's probably not going to happen with it. It's funny because getting back to the topic, you were played the Poltergeist excerpt from that, and I was actually thinking about that. Excuse me, earlier that I believe that the Bell Witch haunting in Tennessee, and I think it was 1810, 1811, somewhere around there. If we look at that and analyze it for what we have on it, that would be a Jinn more than anything else. That would be a Jinn. That's not a poltergeist. People always talk about that being a poltergeist, but that would be Jinn activity. Number one, there was a cave associated with it, and Jinn love places that are dark, desolate, and pretty much abandoned and somewhat underground. So that makes perfect sense with it. Two, it didn't fit in with a traditional haunting, so we know it was a traditional haunting. And 3, it had that trickster element. It claimed it was going to come back and haunt a bunch of future generations, but it never did, at least to our knowledge. It used a lot of scare tactics, but it was responsible for killing John Bell, so they claim that it was with it.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows the destructive aspect with it. But I totally see how that situation sounds like a Jinn to me more than anything else with it. Because if you read those excerpts in the stories, that thing was pretty powerful.
Yeah, you're right.
And that goes far beyond what you would consider to be a poltergeist or a haunting or something like that. And I wouldn't even put it into demonic either. I would put it under a Jinn because of the whole like trickster element and the associations with it, and how I believe the family did try to use a lot of religion to get rid of it, and ultimately left on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So
that was quite a thing.
yeah.
And so let's get into the how are they created that we're going to get into, or what I know that there's an order of creation, and apparently the Jinn are like the oldest of things created. Is that correct?
I believe that they were created after the angels. I
Oh,
think the angels are the first ones that are created, the beings of light.
okay.
And then the Jinn were created as the beings of smoke with fire, and man was created last because um, in Islam, Allah wanted the Jinn to bow down to man because man was considered to be the more kind of like the superior type of being, and the Jinn were like, no way, we're not doing that.
Right.
And they just had this, and the resentment kind of went ever since.
Mm.
That there's always been for a lot of them a resentment against humans for that concept, and a group of them broke away and formed what would be like the Ifrit, or the bad ones that would just solely would want to attack us, and the other ones kind of, some of them converted to Islam and are considered to be pious or good or whatever, and then you still have a whole bunch of them that are neutral and really just don't care either.
Yeah.
That's at least in Islamic theology, you have that. Now, if you have the Christian part of this, um, if you read the Bible doesn't mention jinn for what they are. No, and so that makes a lot of people just say like, well, they're demons and that's it. But the Bible does talk about familiar spirits and other various things like that. And if you read a lot of parts in the Bible about what demons did to people, they sound very similar to things that jinn would do to people. So I'm kind of interested in the original translations of a lot of things that came out in the Bible and seeing what they were really talking about with regards to demons and those kinds of things, because I think there might be something in the translation that could at least relate to jinn being part of it. But at this point, it's still a little bit of a mystery in Judeo Christian religions. So we just kind of connotate them as demons. And if that's the case, then the good ones don't exist. See, in Christianity, there's nothing neutral. Everything is kind of polarized.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it a little bit more difficult when you're dealing with these kinds of things, because it's either a demon or it's not a demon,
Yeah.
kind of like that, and that's a little bit more of a very broad way of saying it like that. But basically, what I mean about it is, if there's something that's not good, it's automatically demonic, and they just automatically put it into that avenue with it like that. Yet, on the other hand, if God tells an angel to smite you and turn you into ashes, that angel ain't going to be your friend.
Right.
So it's kind of like the perspective of how you look at it. So if you look at the behavior of some of these things in the Bible, you see that they were always kind of there
Mm-hmm.
with it. And now what I think too is, if you look at a lot of the mythology of things, you see that there's always some sort of beings or something that have that almost like a trickster element, even a hybrid element. You think of like a satyr, for example, in Greek mythology, how they're very sexual, they hang out mostly in the woods, and they're a combination of a human and a goat. You know, that's very Jinn-like with it. And then you have in the Norse mythology, you have Loki, the trickster, who is always kind of messing up things with both people and the gods. So you always have like elements in every culture that shows that there is that kind of an element that is kind of like suspended in the middle, but really likes to mess with people at the same time. And sometimes it's really harmful, but it's a lot of times it's just for the sake of satisfying itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's its own, and I think that's one of the things you have to really think about with the Jinn is that I don't think they do things evil because they're evil. I think they do things to kind of satisfy themselves. Like they think it's funny to push a ton of flight of stairs, for example, you know. And we kind of like would see like an invisible force, be like, "Oh my God, that's evil, that's demonic," and a Jinn can very easily be like, "Well, I want to know what happened when I pushed him on the flight of stairs."
Yeah.
You know, and that sounds really kind of weird, but that is an element of Jinn as well with it. It's that curiosity that gets involved with it. But I think that they've always kind of been with us through the ages.
Mm-hmm.
And if we really, really look, we can see the evidence of them in a lot of different cultures and backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if that makes any sense.
Sure. You know what occurs to me and is a curiosity to me is the idea that this phenomena was only identified in the Middle East, or in the birthplace of Islam and as part of the Quran and such. But there may be references to it in other ways. But what occurs to me is that, like, say, for instance, Bigfoot. And it's a discussion I think you and I have had before, but I don't think we ever got to the meat of it. But like Bigfoot is Bigfoot here in the U.S. or Sasquatch or any number of names. But over in China, it's a Yowie. In Australia, in Australia, it's a Yowie. And in China, it's a Yeren. And, the wild man in Europe and the Woody Wosa, in Europe and in the UK. But they're all kind of the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that they're exactly the same, but they're kind of the same thing. They're these large
Yeah.
hominid-like ape-being creatures, and but they have an identifier all over the place. But is there some other name that Jinn are traditionally known by in their Western world or in other regions other than Jinn that you're aware of?
Not really. They mostly, some people identify them with the Fae, like we said, but they're not the Fae. You
Hmm.
know, they're completely different than that because of the like the things I said. I explained before, like that. So, no, they pretty much have their own way about them, and it's very defined in Islam.
Hmm.
And I think one of the things that happens is that you have to remember too that Islam doesn't have a lot of things that we all have, like ghosts, for example. They don't have them there. So
Sure.
it's very easy for us to see some of the characteristics of a haunting and just say, oh, that's a ghost from the behavior of it happening because we don't have the education behind us to know
Well,
more
sure.
about it
I
like
think that
that.
I think
And I,
that ghost is the same thing as saying human being. Like there's
yeah.
lots of different types of humans and lots of races of humans and such. So I think it's
Hmm.
just become this homogenized term that we throw at everything that's spiritual. But yeah, it
Well,
just
yeah.
I do think though that there's more than just a passing similarity between the Fae and the Jinn, and I'm not sure I agree that they're not related at all, but I think they might be similar branches on the same
Well,
tree in a
they do have characteristics in common,
yeah.
definitely. Like one is that they both kidnap people.
Mm,
You know, they both are very sexual with human beings. They both have reports of hybrids of their people, their species, and our species with through impregnation and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They both have this tendency of almost like an interdimensional thing. Like if somebody steps into a fairy ring
Yes.
and they come out, there's like a sense of time loss and
Yeah.
disillusionment and those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
That happens with Jinn as well. And they also have some very tight community structures. So there's that aspect to it as well. So I think that they are similar, but I think the Jinn tend to have more of a, I guess you could say, a sophistication
Mm-hmm.
and more of a broad sense of learning about things around them than nature spirits do or the Fae do, which pretty much keep to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jinn tend to have, since they have that whole free will concept, they have more of a curiosity. I always think of like a Jinn would be the type, like if you think of a little kid that puts a magnifying glass on an ant just to see what happens,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the Jinn almost have a mentality like that because since they live so long, a younger Jinn could be like several centuries old, but it could still have the mentality of what we would know as a 6-year-old
Mm-hmm.
and not really know what it's messing with us the way that it actually is like that. So it can just or even really care, like putting an animal in a jar just to see what happens with it,
Right.
like that, and just say it's horrible, but a baby or a 2-year-old wouldn't understand that. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but I've actually heard references to younger Jinn, like doing things just to see what happens with it, and we can kind of be like their guinea pigs in a sense like that. And it's not about cursing or anything like that. It's about them learning at our expense.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that part to it with it. Uh, but like I said before, when you have like the cross hybrids and you have the kidnappings and you have the time lapses and you have also strange lights associated with Jinn and fairies, and you have that trickster element, and they all fall into aliens as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you have like the gray aliens and you have those kinds of things too, they all kind of fall together. So you can see how these three have a lot of similarities that are separate from ghosts, but Jinn have some similarities to ghosts too. So that's why I pretty much say that everything is on the same tree,
Yeah.
but it's different branches.
Right.
And it can be a little bit hard to figure out what branch is for what,
Yeah.
and that's what I feel like my job is, that I'm you know, I kind of like am looking at cataloging these things and seeing like how they all fall together
I
like this
I
with it,
hope you
and
do. I hope you
they
do
have
that.
similarities and they have differences.
You could be like the Tobin spirit guide of our world, you know.
I doubt it.
Well,
Yeah, but
go ahead.
if you look at various types of mythologies, and I look at a lot of mythologies, and you'll see like certain gods, for example, will act just like Jinn do,
Yes.
and that's their whole pattern with it. One of them that I talk about in my book a lot is Dionysus, the wine god. And he is one that's a classic with that because people get possessed around him. They kind of like have an animal instinct when they worshipped him. They had these weird orgasmic followings that happened with it. And there was a huge trickster element that was involved with that as well,
Mm-hmm.
with it. And a lot of that kind of stuff that happens with Dionysus, you would see with people that are involved with the Jinn. The same thing with Loki, the other trickster element guy that's involved with it as well. I collect these cool statues from mythology.
Sure.
So you have that as well with Loki. So if you really read like different types of mythologies, you'll see a lot of elements, even with the gods and the
Yeah.
demigods,
Yeah.
that kind of coincide with Jinn as well, especially with their trickster betrayal element. Like there's that whole concept, like you really don't want to trust the gods because once the god gets angry, the god doesn't want anything to do with you anymore. And you see that all through different types of mythology
Yeah.
with gods and people. You have the same thing with Jinn. They
Mm-hmm.
could string you along And then once you have all their trust, it's like, yeah, you're done. I'm moving on to somebody else.
Oh,
Kind of like that, you know.
yeah.
So you see that too with it. And Muslims will say they can't be trusted at all, but occultists and New Age people will say, well, there are good ones and there are bad ones, and if you learn to work with one, then you can have a good relationship with them.
Mhm.
And I'm not so sure myself. I wouldn't do it myself.
Sure. Well, I mean, if they have a contempt or a disregard for us, then they're probably not going to be
Yeah,
bothered too much with whatever we want. I mean,
yeah.
you might not step on an anthill, but that doesn't mean you want to be friends. You know.
Well, exactly. Exactly. Well, that's a big that's actually a big part of it too, like that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, choose your friends wisely,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that. And the Jinn is not going to be like that. And nowadays, Jinn are getting more and more popular. Like you talked about the Clash of the Titans movie, and if
Yes.
you saw American Gods, there's an Ifrit involved in American Gods as
Oh,
well
I'm
with
trying.
it.
I'm going to watch that. I haven't seen that yet, and I haven't read the book, but I'm dying to watch
Oh,
that.
it's great.
Oh,
It's really great. I would recommend it.
yeah.
But you have different things about that, and it's going beyond that whole concept of the Jinn. When they first entered in our culture and our psyche, they were just these wish granters that
Yeah.
had a little bit of a prankster element to them, and they were kind of silly, and
Yeah.
that's all they were like that. But they're actually a lot more serious than
Mm.
that. And we're going to have a lot more interactions with them as time goes on too. And I can assure you that's going to happen because of particular things going on in the world, like
Uh,
globalism, like a lot of soldiers that I know, when they go over to overseas, they come back and they have a lot of problems. And sometimes they seem like they're Jinn associated with them. Like
mm.
if they bought a necklace or something or a piece of jewelry over there, you have to be really careful because that's another thing about Jinn. They can be bounded into jewelry. And if
Oh,
they're bounded into jewelry and if they're passed on to somebody, you can get the curse from the jewelry.
wow.
And that is something that is a little bit weird for us to understand, but it's also pretty common. Like we know about haunted objects and things like that, but
Sure.
a magician can very easily sum up a jinn and put the jinn into an object.
Mm.
Now, this jinn that was doing it, it's like you just think about it, it's like he could be like, chilling with his family, all of a sudden he gets sucked out of his family, he gets put into this like necklace or something like that,
Oh, yeah.
you know. Then it gets then it gets sent to become a gift for some soldier's wife or something.
Yeah.
He's going to be angry about that,
Yeah.
and if it comes from a culture where we have no understanding of this, it can have some real major problems with it as
Right.
um as a result of that. If you look at it traditionally, a lot of jinn are binded. If something's going to be binded to an object, chances are it's a jinn with it, that they can actually do that. And that's a new concept for us.
Mm.
But yeah, like I said, we are familiar with haunted objects. So you have that part of it as well. But a jinn, I don't think itself would haunt an object. I think we'd have to be forced into it
Sure.
because they are social beings.
Mm. That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, of course, the legendary lamp, of course,
Yeah.
in the Arabian Nights or whatever the book was, that was bound. The genie was bound to it. So
Well,
it's
even in the Book of Solomon, Solomon had a ring,
yeah,
and
he
he
had a
used the
ring.
ring to bind the jinn to
Yeah.
build the temple
Hmm.
like that as well. So you just see that concept as well with it. So there's that part of it too, and that's where you can kind of see the some of the dangers that are associated with these things nowadays with this stuff. A
Yeah.
cursed object can really wreak havoc, especially if you don't have any idea that it's cursed.
Yes,
So
exactly. Exactly.
yeah, so you have a big part of that too. And the other thing about it is that people are moving around all over the place, and you're gonna like eventually we're all gonna have like a Muslim family that we know,
Sure.
or a Muslim coworker that we know, or something like that, and
Or
they'll
in
hear a
or in
different
our
or hear a
families.
concept.
Yeah, in our families too. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly, exactly. So that will happen,
All
and when
right.
that happens, you get a better understanding about that,
Sure.
and the time will come when you start to see like, oh, maybe my beliefs are need to be a little bit more widened.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to our last break of the night already. Can you believe it? We've gone through an hour and a half, 1/2 hour to go. So we'll be right back in just a couple of minutes with the last half hour and Mr. Al Tyas. Don't go away. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Last half hour is upon us. It has just flown by tonight, as always does when there's a good quality conversation happening here on the portal. But we are just going to get into our last shot here. And ladies and gentlemen, the phone lines are open if you want to call in. If you got a question about the Jinn or Al regarding the Jinn, please call in 720-923-0500. Again, 720-923-0500. Those are the numbers to fun right here on the Paranormal Portal. So we are going to get right back at it. And, of course, Don is with us. How you doing, Don?
Doing good, doing good. Hey, just want to let you know that I only got a few minutes. I'm going to jump off. If
Yeah.
you guys are talking, I'm just going to jump off, and we'll talk to you guys later. But I do believe, Paisley, you said you're talking about curses tonight, right? So I
Ooh.
guess Paisley's show is about curses tonight.
That's a perfect tie-in.
There you go.
That is
Actually, it is.
con-
Interesting.
Continuity of messaging between hosts on TFR Live. So that's very cool. All right. So coming up next, of course, is Paisley Wild and the spaces between, and they'll be having discussions about curses. So if somebody's really pissed you off in the past, tune in and learn how. No, I'm just kidding. That's not how it works, ladies and gentlemen. No. But it should be a good show nonetheless. I think it's important to learn how to protect yourself against those kind of things because I think curses are more oftenly inadvertently cast than intentionally. I think that, harboring ill feelings and hate or anger towards someone is a form of curse. And so I think knowing how to protect yourself is important. And that's always the way Paisley rolls. So I'm sure it'll be a great show. So tune in and check it out. But Al, how you doing, brother?
I'm thinking about a list of people I don't like that I can talk to Paisley about so I can curse them.
Al's got a dark side, ladies and gentlemen. Glad he likes the portal.
Oh, yeah, he does.
So where are we at, Al? We got a half
Well-
hour left. What do you think we can squeeze into that?
I think what we could put into that is about encountering a Jinn would be the big thing that I'd like to talk about with
Oh,
it.
sure. Please.
Because I feel like if somebody goes on an investigation or whatever like that, and if they encounter a Jinn, then they should at least have an idea of how to identify something like that and what are the elements behind encountering one.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you can say with it. And I was thinking about like that. It's almost like there's a checklist in a way. And again, it's not cut and dry because you don't know 100% with this kind of stuff, but you can at least get a better idea with it. And one thing, for example, is did you go to a place that was abandoned and associated with violence and death to investigate? Would be one big thing with it. And if you did and you come home and something is happening to you when you're home, that very well could be a Jinn that just attaches itself to you for one reason or another.
Right.
And a lot of times those go away on their own after a while. They either get bored or they just kind of like have to go back to wherever they go or something like that. And usually those kinds of things are harmless, usually. But there have been cases that I've actually worked with where people have actually gotten attacked after investigations like that. And most of the time, they're either places that are considered to be extremely haunted or they're abandoned and allegedly haunted. So those are the two big places for that. So that's something to keep an eye out for. I do believe that if there is a place that is known to be extremely haunted, that's got like a real long history of a lot of violence and bloodshed and things like that, there's going to be other things in there other than ghosts. Just because Jinn just seem to have a natural attraction to places associated with our violence and death for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it just seems to be the case with that. They seem to feed off of that type of energy or something like that.
That's what I was thinking.
Another thing, so what were you going to say?
I was going to say that's what I was thinking too, is that it must be something to do with it's meeting some need of theirs.
Exactly. Another one is if you go on an investigation and you come home and your relatives act strange towards you. This is something that I've seen quite a bit too, like the dog that you've had since it was a puppy attacks you, for
Oh.
example. The cat run under the bed and doesn't want anything to do with you.
Mm.
The kids act like the smaller ones particularly because they're very, very sensitive to this stuff. If they suddenly act like they don't know you or something like that, and if you have, you get really irritable with your spouse, that's another sign of it. For some reason, when people encounter Jinn, a lot of times they have a lot of problems with their marriage. It's really weird how that happens, but that's
Oh.
something that I've seen with it. Sometimes, if a Jinn may end up having some sort of emotional attachment to somebody, and they're not going to like the spouse, and they're going to try to cause friction between them, and you'll see that start to happen. Spontaneous arguments can break out among family members.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, things like that can happen around the Jinn. Uh, Dreams and nightmares, things like that can happen. Usually, if you're actually on an investigation, you're not going to know up front that you're dealing with a Jinn because they're not going to reveal themselves that way while you're there. They want to. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to be like, "Hey, I'm a Jinn. I'm going to mess with you," and that's it. You know, they're going to be. That's just not how they rule. They're going to be a lot more subtle about things
Right.
with it because they kind of calculate and they don't act on emotion like you would think that they would act on. They
Or
start
impulse.
subtle.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or impulse.
um,
They're not impulsive, in other words. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. They're not impulsive. They're not going to just suddenly start shoving you around the room or something like that.
Yeah.
That may come later with it. That's the other thing about it, and just that a feeling of like malaise, misery, sometimes just that melancholic feeling like that could be associated with it. Uh, there are a lot of things that you have to recognize that could say like I have something on me and it may be a Jinn. I used to call these astral critters a while back. I
Mm.
just said, they hop on you and then they stay with you for a while and whatever like that. And now I tend to think they're more likely to be Jinn because Jinn aren't usually they're not bound to anything unless
Mm-hmm.
like I said a magician bounds them to something whatever like that, but they're not bound to like an area. They're not bound to they're not really like a haunting is. They can go wherever the heck they want and they can like leave and do whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but and so if they have an attraction to you, they're gonna like kind of follow you around and do these kinds of things like that. And so that's something you have to really kind of watch out for. And they always tend to stay pretty much one step ahead of us when trying to document things and like activity and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing to follow with it. So you may want to use it as like a checklist or something too if you're investigating a place. Look at the age of the place. Look at the belief systems of the people that could be a factor. It may or it may not be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you want to look at a lot of different things before you automatically determine that something not only is haunted, but if it's haunted by a ghost that's kind of confined to those parameters, or if it's just a Jinn hanging out like that that may get bored and want to come home with you,
Mm-hmm.
or even go back and forth or whatever like that. So those are the kinds of things you want to look at. Now, there's a lot of superstition involved with Jinn, and a lot of that you do have to take as a grain of salt. Like dumping boiling water in a drain could really make it angry, for example. That's so what they say, but then I'm kind of like, that's stuff that I've heard,
Uh-huh.
but I've never seen an experience of something happen, like when somebody gets attacked because they dump boiling water down a drain. But I actually heard like because we all have our own wives' tales, I guess you could say, and one for Jinn is like that with it.
Ah.
But it's kind of an odd one like that because supposedly they like to hang out in drains or something, and I think that parents in the Middle East do things like that to scare their children like kind of like what we do with the boogeyman and stuff like that.
Sure.
So you have to kind of take some things with a grain of salt. But the one the biggest one that I've always known is if it's a place that's been abandoned for more than 7 years by people, then the Jinn can possibly move into a place like that. And it's for some reason it's 7 years. I'm not exactly sure why, but that's what I've researched with it. And so if you have that 7 year time, you want to get like you don't want to go in and just start investigating. You just don't, because that's where you can actually have a Jinn associated with a place like that. That doesn't just go for paranormal investigators. It goes for urban explorers. It even goes for renovators. You hear a lot of times like where a place will be abandoned and a construction site will start renovating it, and all chaos will start to happen.
Yes.
Like that. You hear stories like that all the time, and
Sure.
people automatically go like, "Oh my God, the ghost doesn't want to." It's like, no, I think that actually could be a Jinn that's doing that. You know,
That's
because you just it's habitat.
Yeah, that's a pretty broad stroke, though. Yeah, I mean, because, but we hear about that all the time. Anytime
Yeah,
renovations kick up, and I do think it can be ghosts as well.
it
But
could be.
yeah,
Sure.
but I appreciate what you're saying. Now,
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I'm curious about is a lot of the warning signs seem to line up really closely with demonic. And do you know of any specific ways or any key things to focus on to differentiate if it's a demonic attack or if it's a Jinn?
Well, when a Jinn gets to this extent, they're actually very similar
Okay.
with it.
Okay.
But I think one thing is with a demon that a lot of people talk about demons and possession,
Hmm.
and that, for example, and I think if there's a possession part involved with it, I think that would be more of a Jinn than a demon. Would be one thing with it. Another thing with it would be, of course, with religious objects and connotations and things like that, how they would react to those kinds of things would be another one
Hmm.
with it. And see how, first, the other thing is see if it just leaves and goes on its own is one thing with it. But then the other thing with it, too, is that a lot of times when you have a demon will, a lot of times the demon will only kind of come when it's really authentically summoned one way or another,
Right.
like that.
Right.
So I tend to think that demon attacks are kind of rare with it, because really like there's usually a lot of like usually there's like things that are happening to have a demon come out, like black magic,
Hmm.
rituals, invocations, various things like that you're actually doing to invite the thing in. And there's a lot of things that are going on with it, because you think about it, very few people get possessed by what you would think is a demon, and there are kind of like some checkpoints to look at it.
Sure.
Well, the Jinn is things like going to an abandoned place, and making fun of what's actually in that abandoned place is another thing like that.
Oh yeah.
And looking at what your behavior is would probably be the best way about it. Like if somebody is having these things happen, it's like, okay, what did you do over the past 3 weeks? You
Hmm.
know, did you participate in any particular types of did I know that Paisley's there, but like let's say like somebody that really hates you decided, do you know if anybody hated you to put a curse on you, for example?
Right.
That's really involved in some pretty dark stuff,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
Or did you play with Ouija boards?
Hmm.
Or did you do something directly involved with the occult like that? Or did you go to a place that was abandoned? Did you kind of poke fun at what was there? Did you do there? I think really what it comes down to is the behaviors of what you actually do that would kind of show the difference between the two of them with it.
Oh
But they
sure.
can be very similar, absolutely.
Yeah.
It just depends on what you do and how you do it like that. But I think they're almost like two different types of. It could be like versus a cold versus a type of virus.
Right.
You get a cold this way, but you get coronavirus this way.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like that. You know, so it's kind of like that. Now that we know what you have, now we can work on the ramifications of it. It
So
gets difficult.
so let's say, I guess that'd be kind of a great close to the show. Let's say you believe you have a Jinn. What are some great steps to try to get rid of it? And we've touched on this here and there throughout the show, but let's, really dial in on that part now, because I suspect that, maybe several of the hauntings that I've been contacted about may actually be Jinn. There's some pretty profound things that people have reached out to me about, and not knowing much about the Jinn, it never really crossed my mind, but now it certainly does. So, specifically, any key things that are really good to get rid of them?
I think one thing would be to not give it a lot of attention, because a lot of times they want attention.
Mm.
And if they're doing something that's just kind of like a very mundane thing, like let's say like every so often to knock something over or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
don't be like, oh my God, accident. It's just, you just put the thing back and you kind of ignore it. And eventually I think it would just go,
Okay.
would be one thing with it. Another thing with it would be to, if it's bothering you, then it's a whole other story like that. Then you may have to contact somebody. And I would suggest somebody that has like a spiritual background, because I think that if somebody has the faith that's needed, it can get rid of it. But I think with the Jinn, it's fortunate is a lot of times they'll kind of just get bored and just go on their merry way with it.
Right.
I mean, I've had cases. I had a situation one time where it was not that long ago. In my hallway, all of a sudden, a bunch of things just flew out of the closet and hit the wall and went flying across the floor.
Oh,
And
nice.
I just kind of looked at it like that, and every so often that happens with me, and because I think like they know I talk about them, they don't like it,
Sure.
but I just put everything back and I put it away and I just walked away and it didn't happen again. And I just said, well, I think it's a drive-by, as I call them. I actually do. I call these drive-bys. But if you don't pay much attention to them, then they're not going to keep doing it. They're eventually just going to get bored and go on their own way with it. Now, the other thing about it, though, is if it's attacking you or a member of your family,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's where it's hard to give advice on something like that, because you
Sure.
have to know really what exactly happened. And a lot of times, and let's just say it's a paranormal investigator that went into a place instead of mocking stuff, and now they have somebody in their family that's really having a hard time with it.
Right.
You have to say, okay, what was the conditions behind this? Because you may have to somehow, I believe, you could have to somehow make amends with it, and maybe if you make amends with this thing, it'll start to leave you alone
Sure.
like that. Maybe.
Are
But
th-
then there are other things that you could do to try to drive it out.
right. Now you had mentioned before making the talisman and putting it
Yeah,
under the bed. Are
yeah.
there specific symbols that are Jinn specific to ward them off?
I think Saint Michael, the Archangel, is really good with it. I think if you like Catholics do a novena or 9 days of prayer,
Mm.
and Saint Michael is really good with that kind of stuff, like that, to invoke him. I recommend him all the time. Uh, I recommend too, if you're a pagan, you can actually kind of like have like a. I've known pagans who've worked with these things,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually have like a strong like warrior deity that they would use, maybe like
Oh.
Athena
Okay.
or Thor or something like that, and
Sure.
they'll work with that as well. Sometimes you just have to like get the right mojo behind you and do that.
Mm-hmm.
Other times you just the sounds will work. There are particular sounds in the Bible that help to do this kind of stuff like that.
Okay.
I've used the rosary personally,
Okay.
but there are methods, yeah. And sometimes you just have to look them up and see what you can find as well.
And I think you're right, and that's an important point, because if let's say you're not you don't practice Islam at all, but you go and find an Islamic symbol, put it up on your wall, well, it's not going to really resonate with you. And I think that for
No.
signs and symbols and stuff, it's important that it resonates with the person creating them, because that's what I believe really imbues a lot of the power, or at least the ability to project that, comes with the
And I
faith.
don't Jinn a Muslim either. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and so there are ways that you can actually, do it like that. And there are a lot of, like witchcraft occult methods that do
Sure.
it too. Like a lot of witches do what's called the lesser pentagon banishment ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually works with the fire archangels, and you drop energy and you can kind of banish everything out. So there are a lot of ways that you can do it, and then safeguard your house. What I do is I always salt my thresholds. I put
Mm-hmm.
blessed salt on my thresholds of anywhere that something can get in, and then I also will burn a mixture of frankincense, myrrh, dragon's blood resin, and salt. It's called fiery wall,
Oh.
and I'll use that to kind of purify things too. And the little things will go like that,
Yeah.
and it might kind of do that too. And a lot of times, if a Jinn comes along and just sees, like, like, it's kind of like an attraction thing too. Like, there's certain people that you see and you're like, oh, I don't want anything to do with that person, and then they just kind of leave
Right.
like that. Like they kind of, it's true, but they kind of like check you out and they go like, nah, I'm not gonna mess with you. You're not what I thought you were.
Right.
And then they kind of go like that too, because you have to realize too that the Jinn will think for itself.
Right.
And if a Jinn doesn't see you as a suitable opponent, so to speak,
Right.
it's not gonna pursue you, and it'll probably just go on back to that place and wait for somebody else to come along or something like that.
Yeah.
Unless you made it really angry, and then it will pursue you.
Yeah.
And so it kind of all depends on how it goes. Then you have to find out how and why that happened, because most of the time, if a Jinn comes after you,
Mm-hmm.
there's a reason for it, and it's probably something that you did to make it angry, and you have to kind of find out what happened with it.
Yeah.
And the punishment does not fit the crime. They will do some pretty brutal things to you
Yeah.
just because you stepped on their doormat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Exactly. So, Al, we got a few minutes left, and I definitely want to make sure you have time again to let people know how to stay in touch with you, how to follow you, and where to
so
find your books.
well, a couple of things about that though was I'm going to start. I do make I make talismans for people. I've actually done that for a while. I'm trained in making those. If somebody is really having a hard time,
Oh,
they
cool.
can contact me. We can talk about that. That I can give you something that could actually help keeping things away with it. I've done it a lot in the past. One time I actually took the talisman and I sewed it into a stuffed bunny and gave it to a little girl who had no idea. And she was having something come into her bedroom at night. Never bothered her again.
Oh,
It's
fantastic.
kind of like things like that that I do to try to help people, especially children. I try to help them with situations like that. Can't always guarantee that they work. A
Sure.
lot of times they do, a lot they don't. But what they could do is I have a Facebook page called Project Rabbit Hole, which is the name of my book. And you can always go on there, like that page, and send a message, and I will get the message from there.
Mm-hmm.
You could add me on Facebook. You may not want to because you might hate me if you go on if you add me on Facebook like that, because I really am kind of a sarcastic SOB sometimes. I'm human.
Sure.
Um, or you can go on lulu.com/ATYAS, and you can find my books there too.
Okay.
Um, I really recommend, and I don't want it to sound like I'm just really plugging,
No,
but
this is your
a lot of
opportunity.
stuff I'm talking about, I do put it in my book, and people can actually reference this stuff, and you get a lot of good information out of there, because a lot of the stuff I talked about tonight, I put in the book so people can actually have it.
Right.
So if anybody can do it, normally what I do is people can contact me directly through Facebook or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and I can arrange to get you a signed book.
Oh, cool.
But it's a little bit difficult right now because we're all coronated and quarantined,
Sure.
and it's harder to get to the post office. So I don't want to do that. right now because I don't want to get coroned, you know. So I'm
You can
staying in the
schedule
quarantine.
pickups though. They
Yeah,
yeah, we do that here at
I
home
can
all the
do
time.
that.
So yeah,
That's a good point.
yeah.
That's a good point. But and like I said, I'm a retired investigator, so I do not go into haunted places anymore at all.
Okay.
I don't like them now, but I'm always willing to help somebody if they need help,
Excellent.
and send somebody that I worked with or trusted, reliable like that, and that can actually help as well.
Okay, guys. Well, we're all out of time. A special thank you again to Al. Thank you, sir, for coming on. We love you all. Be good, be kind, be nice. Take care of each other. Help each other out. Find the magic in every day and remember to laugh as much as you can. I'll be back tomorrow night with some night terrors for you. So tune in, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on YouTube, and I'll meet you there. Guys, have a great night. Stick around for Paisley. Good night.
That's crazy.